Howdy y'all, this is Redwolf. This is going to be the start of our primitive spear discussion, and I thought the best way to do that was to come out here, find a place that has a bunch of these thin, straight-ish poles, and instead of giving y'all my ideal primitive spear, I'm going to make a generic one based on what I've seen everybody else is using, so that I have a comparison to show you why the other more complicated spear designs matter. So if y'all hold with me, I'm going to reposition a little bit and show y'all a quick way to make one of these things. So I decided to make this a little bit more complicated for myself and do the filming a little bit different. But this tree right here is the one or sapling, I suppose, is the one I've decided to use. It's probably without the bark up here, probably about a thumb thickness. Sometimes you see people try and cut down stuff, you know, as big as a baseball or a softball and try and carve it down. I mean, if that's all you got, it's all you got. Work with it. This is more in the generic average zone, and it's not too tall, it's not too short, and it's fairly straight, but you can probably already see that it runs a little bit. And this is in the vein of what you see your average survival spear being made out of. So I'm gonna go cut it down right fast, and we'll talk a little bit about technique. So where I've got my blade right here, I don't think you can see me in here too well. What I could do, and actually what I'm going to start doing, is kind of pre-trim this a little bit. And this is my Ontario RTAC 2 that I'm going to be using as my buoy today. So what you can do, what a lot of people do, is just hack at it until it falls down. What I'm going to try and do is cut it on some angles to sort of preform my point a little bit. That's my intention. We'll see what happens after I actually start hacking in here. I'm gonna get at least 2 of these sides. That RTAC fights so good. I'm basically using the stump that we're about to make as my stump anvil to push everything in through. Alright. Camera to cooperate. Alright. And just like that, we've got a rough point that a lot of people would be happy with right there. And I would use this on a snake or something like that if I had to. I might even be tempted to just chop it right here and make a throwing stick out of it, personally. But this would certainly serve as a decent haft for like my cold steel Bushman that I'm using on one of my spear hafts over there. Some of the little tang stuff. This is suitable for a more advanced type of spear. But it's not great. Like there's one right here. If I was getting real serious about it, this one right here. Make sure we can see everything. Yeah, this one right here is a lot straighter. It's a better type of wood. It's a little bit harder. if we weren't making a primitive spear, that would have been the one I cut down. So the next thing I want to do here is cut this to length. I'm using 5 feet-ish as my test, and this has a 10-inch blade on it. So I'm going to come down and say right here is going to be my foot. I'm just going to do a real rough guide, pinching with my fingers, and moving her down. Okay, so there's some little bits of stuff right here. I'm just going to use that as my rough mark. Now, with primitive spears, just like more fancy ones, you have to decide if you want, particularly if you cut down a sapling, it's got a taper. It's bigger at the base, smaller as it gets up. You've got to decide if you want your spear point on the big end or the little end. I tend to put them on the larger end myself. Because that aids in wounding properties. But if you're really worried about it getting in to the target to begin with, I would put it on the smaller end so that you've got you don't have to worry about the structural integrity snapping off right here while you're pushing with the big end, because you've got more meat back here to take the impact force. Which is a really complicated way of saying it, but I'm going to just trim this right fast. I've got a really big knife, so I can lock this in here and cut in front of me. I can probably work it in pretty easy and sort of get my spearhead shape running. I don't know if y'all can see this or not, but I'll try and get it up on camera. And I'm just using this middle part of my blade. And this is one of the advantages to a bigger knife, is you can get out here and do these big chopping tasks. You see I've got this right here already cut and separated. So got this, and you see I've got my taper here. You can see that pretty well. So what I would do is now trying to keep it sort of in the center of the point of the shaft as best you can, because what happens is when you're making your thrust, if the tip's over here but the handle's over here, when you go to stab, you're going to slide past the target instead of hitting it. I've done a pretty good job with this. That's right about 5 foot. I did a good job measuring that. So from here, I just hold it right here. I'd lock it behind my on the instep of my leg. I'm just gonna push up and cut. I don't want too big of a point here, because if it's too long and thin and really good at penetrating into the target, they tend to be really weak and will snap off before they go in all the way. So I've just got a real short, kind of stubby point right here. This is good enough for what you're going to get out of this. And this is a softwood, so fire hardening this isn't going to do anything. And fire hardening doesn't give you more damage. Fire hardening really gives you more resilience. It's more strikes and more stuff you can hit with this before you have to come in, resharpen it, and do it over again. Yeah, I like this for right now, but depending upon how it ends up doing in our testing, we're going to do in a little bit, I may come back and sharpen the other side too, just to make a point on practicing of it. And as I mentioned, you know, this is about shoulder height. I can grab this at my waist. It's real comfortable. It's a great walking stick. And I think a lot of people confuse a spear with a walking stick, something you can move right here. But if I just reach out to my waist, which is halfway, and pick it up, you know, I've got no reach advantage here. You know, it's really hard. If I'm going to stab something on the ground, see my point's up here, I'll use the blunting. I'll stab something on the ground. you know, it's within, you know, 2-3 feet of me. I don't have any reach. If I reach out, I don't have any power. And I think one of the other things with this is, particularly as kids, people just don't know better, or know better is the wrong term, haven't, I suppose, had some of the learning opportunities I have had, other people have had. You often confuse a thrusting spear with a throwing spear. Now this is on the upper end height and weight wise for what you want for a throwing spear, because a throwing spear needs to be lightweight enough to be held and thrown accurately, because if you put too much body into it, because of when the throwing spears are heavier, you put too much body into them and they don't throw as accurately, because you instead of focusing on the technique, you end up adding power to it, and the stuff that makes it more powerful throws your aim off. It adds more wiggle right at the moment of release and affects everything. So that's enough jibber jabber on this. I'm going to go back, and I've got another type of primitive self spear I want to show y'all and just talk a little bit about it. So the other major type of self spear is going to be stuff like bamboo or cane. It's hollow. This is a tree, you know, it's dense, it's solid all the way through. This has these little bits right here which are solid-ish, and the rest of this is hollow. Now that lets you make one of two types of heads. It is like the easiest way to make batoned out splits and make a fishing small game gig. And you can see a lot of my my sticks, the spacers that keep this open, have fallen out, so I'll replace those in a little bit. But the other thing you can do with these is you just cut it off at an angle, and this is a piece of switch cane, and you make these real sharp hypodermic points. And like I said, these are all self points. These are all primitive self spears, all about the same height. Damage wise, these will do. I have used these on stuff like snakes and stuff, and I mean, even like you can see, like damage wise, we're like comparing a 9mm to like a shotgun slug, which means that this will slide in and go in further because it has less resistance, but it won't do any damage. You know, you can pin frogs, snakes, little stuff with these, but they're not going to do any real damage. You might wound stuff like a deer, something like that in a survival scenario, but you're not really going to do primitive living with them, I suppose is the direction I'm heading in. You're not going to just be able to go out and survive indefinitely off of this unless you're lucky or you're supplementing it with something. I'm going to do some comparatives at the end of this series on some targets, so stick around and you'll get to see me hit some stuff with these, and we'll probably talk about the damage a little bit more when I've actually got something I'm trying to damage to talk about. So until next time, this is Redwolf signing off. Y'all keep up the good fight. I've got more spear videos inbound.